Welcome back to Cheche. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the only thing that happens in this country is politics, but there are other considerations to take account of. Our guests are Dr. Habil Olaka, speaking for KEPSA, Stephen Mutoro, speaking for COFEC, and Anzetse Were, a development economist. And we have been talking about the political, the ramifications rather, of the prolonged electioneering on our economy. And one of the things that puzzles me is how we're so fixated on the elections and the political outcome. And nurses have been on strike for coming up to 3 months now. We've been talking about the fact that people are struggling. They have no money in their wallets. The economy has contracted. But we haven't talked about the fact that, you know, people cannot access health services.
Yeah, for me, I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, the basics. When you talk about health, we were so happy that the government was able to resolve the issue of the doctors. But in the manner the government has handled the issue of nurses, I think it raises questions whether either nurses in the view of government are not important, or government thinks the doctors and other professions can be able to take, to do what the nurses are doing. But it raises another interesting issue. We are spending so much money on cholera that is actually related to what would have paid the nurses. Believe me, what the nurses do in this country, no doctor or clinical officer can be able to do. Now, when a country's view is not to prioritize, because after security, I think the next issue should be health. So even private sector, even government, I think we should be able to be united and say, look, issues about health, we need to find a way that we can be able to address that issue. Because if we are not able to resolve nurses' issue, why, for heaven's sake, are we spending 9.9 billion on subsidized maize flour, which sometimes, of course, people have been saying whether it's present, not present. So we are able to spend money, splash money in some places that if you ask Wanjiku, will not be a priority. And it will actually also be curing the symptom of the main problem. So for me, I think government really need to get to the priority of issues about health, security, and address the labor unrest. We are not going to continue pretending in this country that all is well, that even the issues about elections. I mean, what if, and I like to get scenarios, what if all of us on October 17th fall ill because cholera has this kind of problems? What if, we need to look at health as really a key issue. And the fact that the opposition are also losing, the fact that the opposition are also not raising the issue, because it has appeared that nowadays, I think once the opposition leader says something, then that seems to be the focus for this country. But we are forgetting that the issue of health is really basic. So other than the health, I think we really need to look at what are government priorities in terms of spending. So health is so important, and I really hope that Kenyans will actually, and Woodwork, anytime I come here, you forgive me, because I always say the fourth estate.
The media. Yes,
the media have made this country look like the only thing we should discuss about is actually elections. And for me, this one interesting because the media are not focusing on the nurses' strike. They are not focusing on the implication. They are not focusing on the implications of the elections and what have you. So I think it will be important for us to also, when we are tempering the national debate, also to look at what the priorities are, so that we don't just continue doing this. She talked about
intellectual.
I wouldn't be unfair to say it could also be applying to our media, because our media are not analytical, they are not doing all these issues, we are not analyzing why we are spending more money on all these things. Yeah. So, by the way, I'm not here to bash the media in any way, but I think it's important the media to point us to this direction, because if the media points us to this direction, I can tell you, the nurses' strike will be over.
Mutege, I was coming to you about that, because how is it that nurses have been on strike for 3 months and we don't seem to there is no national outrage about this?
You know, health is an involved function. So nurses is the responsibility of the governor. The Council of Governors have not agreed with the organization that runs the Union of Nurses. So that's the main thing. In fact, in some counties, there is no problem. I remember, for instance, when the former governor of Bomet was here, when the doctors were on strike, and she said, no, there's no problem there. There's no doctor on strike, no nurse on strike. In other counties, you'll find that, like yesterday, I understand in Kirinyaga, the deputy governor sacked all the nurses, and there is advertising for jobs. In other counties, they are still talking. There are still hope. So,
but why do we see this attention and anxiety around elections, but no sort of anxiety around the fact that there are people in this country who cannot access health services, that there are people in this country who have skills and they're not being adequately compensated for them? Why do we not see outrage about the fact that, as you say, as you have pointed out, that they're mixed, there is no uniform approach to how you deal with this crisis? Because it is a crisis.
To me it's because big people, the elite, are not. When the teachers were on strike, for instance, people didn't care. When the doctors were on strike, so what?
So is that
the poor person, Wanjiku, who cannot afford to go to a private clinic, to see a private nurse or medical assistant, that's wrong. They're the ones affected. Then there will not
so
much
what does that mean then in the context of our conversation, our broader conversation around elections and the fact that people have less in their wallets? And so what we seem to be saying is that for the next 2 months or so, bearing in mind that the election may or may not take place, there might be another repeat election, that no one is supposed to fall ill.
Did you hear any gubernatorial candidate speaking about nurses? None. Did you hear any presidential candidates addressing the issue of those strikes? No. Because the people in Kenya or the Wanjiku probably doesn't understand our rights. They should have insisted on that being a top agenda in the campaign. It wasn't.
May I just add that I think one of the broader problems that we have as a country is that politics is where we find our celebrities. If you look at the US, they have a celebrity system in the entertainment system, and people obsess about Beyonce or whoever. In Kenya, we obsess about our political leaders. Those are celebrities. And I think when it comes to the issues that you're talking about, which I think are very valid, and as the people on the panel have said, I mean, we cannot expect the economy to grow if people aren't getting access to health. I mean, it's a no-brainer. We don't need to argue that, you know, we should be paying attention to the nurses. Why aren't we? It's because us, we're obsessed with politicians as celebrities. And that is what we want to do with our time as Kenyans. That is what entertains us. That is what we talk about. You know, you in this country, politics is such a celebrity status. When you go to a restaurant or you go to somewhere or you're having a glass of wine, people switch off the music and switch on the TV at 9 because everybody needs to look at what's happening in the political sphere. And I think for me that's one of the problems I've been having across the board, is that even when you look at some of the analysts that are meant to be giving objective analysis on issues of the economy, they have political leanings. So how are we as a country expected to generate objective analysis on our country when some of our leading analysts are politically aligned? And that's one of the problems I have fundamentally as a Kenyan, is that our politicians are celebrities and we are very comfortable with their entertainment day in, day out, and Kenyans are just okay with that situation.
Actually, I watched one of the...
Habil is quiet on this issue of nurses.
Maybe just a quick one.
Do you not fall sick, Habil?
I'm sure we'll talk about it. I watched, and I actually had to switch off my TV last night on this television. I watched one of the lawyers, one of the prominent lawyers, you know, sort of, who has felt, I mean, captive of political, you know, leanings, that he could hardly express himself. You know, ordinarily you find that gentleman in the courtroom, you know, would express himself in such a very interesting way. But yesterday he was torn between the party and the profession, and as he says, I think just lost it completely. I mean, when you talk about issues, for me that's a very interesting thing, that the so-called political analysts in this country, and I think for me the narrative of media is that you need to be reshuffling those people, because you have certain people that you can actually predict them, what they're going to say, even before they say anything. But that, I think, beside the point. The point is that she talks about politics as celebrities. That is true. But if there's one thing that the Kenyan politicians, celebrities I should call them, would fear, is something called the media. That's why many of them would want even to invest in media, influence the media. So if you, for example, you took page 1 of a paper, or your first news bulletin, saying that the following members of parliament have done something about the nurses' strike, you will see how people are going to choose to be part of that list. Now, there's also a fallacy about health being a devolved function. I mean, we have one indivisible country. When people talk about devolved function, I think it's also important to look at what are the national interests. What brings together the counties? So I think it goes back to the Minister of Health, in my view, to look at because even the governors have a point. The allocation that are given to them is not sufficient. So I think it's important that people should not just be dismissing this as a council of governors. It should be actually a Kenyan problem when we talk about health.
Okay, so Habil, what are your thoughts? Because we've heard some possible solutions going forward, planning around election years, election insurance. But when it comes to things like labor unrest and the fact that ordinary Kenyans, we're anticipating election years, extended electioneering, that they will be more vulnerable to any sort of shocks to the system. How can you, from where you sit as industry, be a part of the solution as opposed to the unfair comment which you made about cheerleading?
One of the things that I think has come up from the discussion is the fact that health is a devolved function. And as KEPSA, the way KEPSA works is that we have got what we call sector boards. Sector boards handling specific aspects and almost like try to match what the government has. And for instance, I chair the public finance sector board. There is a health sector board. And the health sector board is the one that takes care of an issue like this one, the issue relating to the nurses. But I think the challenge has been more or less at the level of engagement because of the fact that it's devolved. The level of engagement, most of it will not be at the national level, would be possibly through the Council of Governors. And so the structure of KEPSA has got to ensure that the engagement is at the right level. And I think they are picking it up from that perspective, and we'll possibly see some resolution of the issue going forward.
Okay, this is what some of our viewers are saying. The economy can only thrive in a peaceful environment. The present climate in this country is getting more and more poisonous by the day. Please change direction. Going back to the rate caps, as an insider, banks will use the media and lies to kill the interest rate cap bill. They have technology, it's easy. We must give this bill, this rate cap, at least 10 years. The central governor appointed people. It is wrong to say it's after the market. It's for the benefit of all. Many people have benefited. And, that's the thrust of the message, which buttresses Stephen's point.
Yeah. Just a second, maybe just to agree with that. I think when it's not good for the banks, and with a lot of respect to the banks, then business will make money. But when it's not good for banks, then it's bad for everybody. And I think I want to agree with that viewer, that they have invested in IT, they have invested in a lot of things that should cut costs, which should be reflected on all these kind of issues. Because with the rate caps, we have not been told, by the way, of a bank that has collapsed. But we hear every day in the media, sponsored kind of articles from respectable people, saying things that are not true. In my view, I think it's important to tell the truth about the banks. Yes, they could be affected, but they should also be telling us their plan B. Their plan B is, what are they doing to cut the kind of wastages?
We need to be winding up, but very quickly, the caps removal is economic rubbish. Rates across the world are on average 3%. The bankers are lazy robbers,
yes.
Habil, and the point is they borrow from abroad at about 2% and then come here to relend at 30%. Robbers.
Well, I think, first of all, the numbers that are being quoted, for example, lending at 30%, nobody's lending at 30%. I think you pick
which
one...
Which is why the rate cap came in.
Yeah, you pick one facility for which it has defaulted, and therefore there are penalty rates on it, and average rate comes to 30%, and you indicate that as if it's the market rates. Everybody is lending at 30%, and it gives a very bad picture of the whole credit market. I think the average lending rate, even at the time when the rate caps were being passed, was 15.5%. Which was just about 15.5%.
Yeah, it was small. It's
the average lending rate in the market.
Let me ask about this question before you wind up. About labor and about strikes and about demonstrations. You saw what happened yesterday. You could not get from Kisumu to Nairobi to Kawas and all about Nyeri, Thika, whatever. What are you going to do about the economy if this extension of the election to 60 days? Or there is no election at all, and then, according to NASA, then go to the natural. We were told natural situation will take place. That means they will go to the street.
Sorry, respond. Yeah.
What do you think will happen?
In terms of the no end in sight, is what you're saying.
The demonstrations and demonstrations from both sides.
And that's why you have the final word because we're out of time.
Okay. I mean, I think we need to understand that there's a need to create institutional stability in our country, and that is both the role of government, non-governmental actors, private sector, the civil society. And I think as Kenyans we need to get a lot more serious around creating institutional sustainability and institutional stability, so that politics doesn't become, or the elections don't become, the be-all and end-all of analysis that we're going through. So I think in terms of my parting shot is that let us be intellectually honest in the way we interrogate issues in this country, and let us understand that we are one of the people who have a role to play in getting the economy off of this trajectory where we're hit each time we have an election.
Okay, thank you. We'll have to leave it at that for the moment. This conversation will carry on, no doubt, particularly once we see what happens once the Supreme Court issues its full judgment later this morning. To be interesting to see whether we see the same sort of reaction across the market. But for now, I'll thank you because we're out of time. Our guests this morning have been Dr. Habil Olaka, head of the Public Sector Board, Public Finance, I believe, Board at KEPSA, Stephen Mutoro, the Chief Executive at the Consumer Federation of Kenya, COFEC, and Nzekte Were, a Development Economist. We thank you for your time this morning. Our thanks also to our panel of one, Mutegi Jao. My name is Udwa Kamimo. Thank you for watching Cheche. We'll see you next week.